government-led Barossa gas project off the top of Darwin, going right up into the Timor Sea, and as it's planned with carbon capture and storage, which, as we know, is a total BS concept because it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because they've just tried it at Gorgon, and the best they've got at Gorgon in WA, which is the world's biggest one. They started off getting 60% of the, they reckon, you know, that was their figure, of the CO2 being captured. It's now at 30%. But the WA government just keeps them, lets them keep going. I mean, that is the trick. You know, you get a dodgy CCS project up, and once it's up, then you're pretty much home and host, because no government wants to say, no, you have to stop gas production, right? They don't want to do it, especially in WA, because they get royalties out of it. So the Barossa project is very dirty gas. And dirty gas is defined as gas with a lot of CO2. Weirdly, clean gas is still methane, right? And when you burn it, it's absolutely horrible. And when it leaks, it's even worse potentially, you know, because it's got a global warming factor of about 20, something over a 100-year span, but over the 20-year span, which it should be, right? Because that's how long it lasts. It's got an 80 times CO2 warming factor. So we've got to stop methane leaking. We've got to stop pulling it out of the ground. But the Barossa project has 18% of CO2 just coming out of the ground when they pull it up. So the dirtiest gas project in Australia. So what are they going to do? Now Chris Bowen says, you know, in new projects, Barossa's a new project, right? Under the safeguard mechanism, new projects are supposed to be at net zero from the start in terms of carbon emissions, and they're supposed to have international best practice established for Australian conditions. That isn't yet anywhere in the legislation. We hope it'll come out in the safeguard mechanism regulations, but it's not there yet because the regulations aren't up. So that means, in theory, hello, a wasp trying to get me. Maybe it's a Korean wasp. In theory, that the Barossa project should be at net zero when it starts up, with a bit of a holiday till the CCS project gets up, and then it should be, according to international best practice, at zero emissions, because the CCS will take all of the carbon dioxide and it'll bung it down holes. Now there's a bit of an issue with this because the holes are 500 kilometres away from where they're pulling the gas up. And the 500 kilometres where it's supposed to go in is an old gas field that Santos bought off ConocoPhillips, I think it was, and it's the Yundan field, which is in Timor-Leste waters. And there's a pipeline, because of course there would be, that went from that 500 k's to Darwin to take the gas out of that field. So what they plan to do is they plan to recondition that 500 kilometre pipeline and make it work for CO2, which is a smaller molecule of gas, so it's likely to leak up there anyway. Pressure all the gas back into the Yundan field, stick it in the well holes that still exist, which is a wonderful idea in theory because it means then they don't have to decommission the Yundan field. It saves an absolute massive amount of money. There's only one problem with it. It's not going to work. It can't work. It's too expensive. And the only way that Santos is going to make this thing work is if they BS the government and the whole of the Australian community and their Korean backers and say, no, it's cool, you know, in like 10 years we're going to get a CCS project up and then we can get rid of all the CO2 and then there'll be clean gas. It's not now, okay, so what are we going to do with the gas now beforehand? We're just going to get the CO2, we're just going to stick it up into the atmosphere and say, well, goodbye, because that's what they do now. So it's going to be vented until CCS gets going. Nothing else they can do. And that will create a massive amount of emissions. And the question is, therefore, Will the Australian government let that go ahead? Well, it seems like they might, because the way that it works now under the safeguard mechanism is you've got a little bit of a span, and you can do a deal and say we're going to get CCS going, and so once it gets going we'll be cool. So in the meantime you've got to put our baseline up in order to accommodate it, and of course we'll make the baseline go down gradually, but it's a massively big baseline, so it's chuffing out CO2 into the atmosphere like crazy, as well as whatever methane leaks. So that is part of the problem and why it's so dodgy. And Santos were really dumb to get into this in the first place, because it was always going to be way too expensive, but now they're caught. So they're trying to tell us all it's really good, and they have just done a deal now with a whole lot of people to say, oh yeah, we'll get behind you and we'll back you to make this pipeline work and go to CCS. God knows how they did it. It must be really dumb. The other point about Santos and why this is so crook is that they started drilling wells pretty close to Darwin for the new field for Barossa gas, and it was very close to the Tiwi Islands. It wasn't within the 5K zone that's usually counted as being country, as it were. So they didn't think what they had to do was consult with traditional owners about it. But the Tiwi Islanders got onto it. They took them to the federal court, and the judge in the federal court says, yes, you do have to consult with them. I'm sorry, you have to consult not only with the traditional owner corporations, but with actual people from the Tiwi Islands who are going to be affected. And they won in the federal court. But then Santos and NOPSEMA, the regulator, appealed it. And they went to the full bench of the federal court here in Melbourne. That was, how long ago now? Feb? When, Rob? November. Thanks, Rob. November of last year. And the full bench of the federal court found in favour of the Tiwi Islanders. So now Santos has to start again. It's got to consult with the traditional owners again and get up a new environmental plan, which they're in the process of doing. But the Tiwi Islanders have also got an underwater cultural heritage study underway, which might put a spoke in Santos's wheel there. And our great federal government is consulting, we understand, with gas companies about how to do an underwater cultural heritage without talking to the traditional owners. So there's a letter about to go from Sunrise to Tanya Plibersek saying, no, you can't do that. You've got to consult with the traditional owners about the process for determining what's good for underwater cultural heritage. So that's underway. So spokes are being put in Santos's wheel all along the path, and brings us to the point of being here, which I'm sorry it took a fair while to do, right? But coming to it, so the Korean government got behind Barossa a long time ago through three agencies, through a Korean government-owned bank, through a Korean government-owned export credit agency, and through another company that's very closely associated, sort of a big family company that's closely associated with the Korean government. They've all put money in, and currently the amount of money amounts to about $600 million US, which is on the letter, with a bit more for the other company. And it's got to be pretty obvious to the Korean government that the whole deal is looking a bit dodgy, like the Santos Barossa project could fall over. So in all of those cases, they were having another look at the funding, and the deadline for looking at the funding for at least one of those agencies is the end of the month, the end of May. So that is why these actions are on now. Tell the Korean government, look, this is a really dodgy, risky project for you, for your investment. And as well as that, you and the Korean government are supposed to be going for net zero by 2050. So what on earth are you doing putting money into this? You might have thought it was good in the beginning, as a transition fuel, but this is really dirty CO2. Not clean. It's the worst And it's going to really mess up the global environment, not just the Australian one. So really, it's done. Look at it, pull your money, you can still do it without a problem because you've got no commitment, you're not going to lose on it. Just reconsider and do it. So there was an action like this outside the Korean embassy in Canberra on 20th of August. This is the next one. I'm sorry, I keep saying August. April, the other one with the name. Outside on 20th of April. This is the next one, and we're going to be pushing, and Sunrise is going to be pushing to see if we can get actions at other Korean consulates. This one in Brisbane, this one in Sydney. There's not one in Perth. There is one in Tassie, but it seems to be very tiny. So we'll see how we go by the end of the month and see if the Korean government changes their minds.